In societies without coinage, giving something away did not end an exchange. It began an obligation that could remain active for years. Entire communities depended on these acts, not merely to meet daily needs, but to build lasting relationships, status, and alliances that reached across distances. Before money existed, value did not reside in objects themselves. It lived in the bonds those objects created between people. Goods moved through systems grounded in personal obligation rather than impersonal exchange. Objects passed from hand to hand not only to satisfy material needs, but to establish relationships that could be called upon months or even years later. Before coins, before banks, belief ruled the world. These relationships had to be actively maintained. What appeared as simple generosity was in practice a network of expectations that shaped cooperation, reputation, and access to resources. Long before written records or formal contracts, human groups across continents relied on carefully managed reciprocity to organize resources and sustain trust. In small-scale societies, whether mobile foraging bands, coastal fishing communities, or early farming villages linked by kinship, trust was never automatic. It had to be performed and made visible through everyday actions. Sharing meat after a successful hunt, offering finely made tools or rare ornaments during seasonal gatherings, or presenting carefully chosen prestige items to visitors from neighboring territories. These were deliberate investments in social bonds that carried expectations far into the future. At the heart of gift exchange lay three fundamental obligations that governed nearly every significant interaction: the duty to give, the obligation to receive with respect, and the necessity to reciprocate later with a gift of comparable or greater value. These were not optional courtesies. They formed the unwritten rules that held communities together. A gift carried something of the giver, their status, their history, their intentions. Accepting it meant accepting a connection. Refusing without strong reason could signal distrust or hostility. Failing to return a suitable gift risked weakening or even breaking the relationship. The intentional delay between receiving and giving back was essential. It transformed a single exchange into an ongoing partnership that could last for months or years. One of the most intricate expressions of this system developed among the communities of the Trobriand Islands off the coast of New Guinea. Prominent men participated in the Kula, a ceremonial exchange network linking dozens of islands across hundreds of miles of open sea. They voyaged in large ocean-going canoes, carrying treasured shell valuables that moved in two opposing directions around the ring. Each valuable had its own name, its own history of previous owners, and its own reputation built over generations. The exchanges followed strict protocol and stood completely apart from everyday barter of food or tools, a practice the islanders called gimwali and regarded as far less significant. In the Kula, prestige came not from accumulating the shells, but from circulating them wisely and generously. A man who received fine pieces and passed them on with skill and timing strengthened his alliances, secured safer passage for future voyages, and created opportunities for cooperation that might otherwise have remained closed. But if that circulation slowed, the entire system began to weaken. Far to the north, along the Pacific Northwest coast, indigenous nations such as the Kwakiutl, Haida, and Tlingit practiced the potlatch. High-ranking hosts invited guests from both allied and rival groups to elaborate feasts held inside elaborately carved longhouses. During these events, they distributed and, on particularly important occasions, deliberately destroyed large quantities of finely woven blankets made from cedar bark and mountain goat wool, beautifully carved cedar boxes, canoes, and sheets of hammered copper. The scale and quality of the gifts were carefully calculated and witnessed by all. Greater displays asserted higher status and claims to leadership. Those who received carried the clear responsibility to organize their own potlatch later, aiming to match or exceed what they had been given. Through these cycles, surplus resources were redistributed across the community, and social rankings were continually tested and reaffirmed in public view. Yet this balance was fragile. The pressure to outdo previous displays sometimes strained the resources of entire communities. In many regions of Melanesia, a related pattern appeared in what outsiders later described as big man systems. Here a man rose to influence not through birthright or force, but through his proven ability to gather and then generously redistribute large quantities of pigs, yams, shell valuables, or other goods at carefully timed feasts. Those who accepted his gifts became bound to him through gratitude and the expectation of future return. His authority rested directly on the steady, visible flow of his generosity. He attracted followers and maintained his position precisely because he gave away more than he kept. The moment that flow slowed, his position began to weaken. Across these different societies, gift exchange demonstrated something fundamental. Value before coinage was not limited to the physical qualities of an object. Every transfer added new layers of history and meaning. It created reliable partnerships where formal contracts did not exist, and turned surplus production into social capital that could be drawn upon when needed. Alliances were formed, marriages were facilitated, long-distance networks were sustained, and potential conflicts were often eased through the shared understanding that a generous gift today could call for an equally generous return tomorrow. In many communities, a single well-timed act of giving could simultaneously touch economics, politics, kinship, ritual life, and personal reputation. Yet these systems had clear limits. In competitive settings like the potlatch, escalation could push communities toward unsustainable production. In smaller egalitarian groups, the constant expectation of sharing could restrict the accumulation of resources needed for larger projects. As human populations grew larger, as labor became more specialized, and as contact with distant and less familiar groups increased, the intensely personal nature of these reciprocal obligations became difficult to sustain across distance and time. Beyond that point, the system began to weaken under its own demands. Gift exchange did not disappear with these changes. It gradually withdrew from its central role in everyday economic life and remained most visible in ceremonial contexts. In weddings, funerals, peacemaking rituals, and diplomatic encounters. What persisted was a deeper recognition that genuine value could be created and preserved through human relationships, even when systems later shifted toward more abstract forms. In the next episode, we will examine how bride price shaped marriage and economic alliances. Through the transfer of goods and obligations at marriage, reciprocity moved from temporary exchange into permanent alliance.